Now that your teacher has given you some time to independently work some geometry practice problems, let's go through and check the answers as a group. So for number one, we've got a figure that is a triangle, and we recall from the group practice problems that a triangle has a total of 180 degrees inside of it. Angle number one is 30, angle number two is 105. So if we add 105 plus 30, we know that the two angles that are given to us come up to a total of 135. So that means to find this angle that's missing, we simply need to take the total number of degrees in a triangle, which is 180, subtract 135, and that means that we've got 45 degrees left over for that missing angle. So our answer should be B, 45 degrees. Number two, what is the measure of y? This one requires a little bit of additional background knowledge. Notice that these two angles right here, if you kind of look at them together as a group, they form a straight line. You might recall from 7th grade that a straight line, any angle that makes a straight line, you measure all the way around and it comes to a total of 180 degrees, just like a triangle does. So because these two angles together make up a straight line, if you look at this angle put together with this angle, they form a straight line. Added together, they have to equal 180 degrees. So if this angle that's given to us is 90, that means that this angle has to be 90 degrees. Because again, the two of them put together have to equal 180. So now we've got two of the three angles of this triangle. The triangle has 180 degrees total. 90 plus 50 is 140. So if we take 140 degrees that are already accounted for from the total of 180, that leaves 40 degrees left over for angle Y. So that must be the correct answer. Number three, this is another similar problem. What is the measure of the two missing angles? So again, we've got two angles right here that form a straight line. A straight line has to equal 180 degrees, exactly the same as a triangle. So because this one is 50 degrees, then angle Y must be 180 minus 50, which means that that angle must be 130 degrees. So, I'm sorry, not 130. Would help if your math teacher, oh, no, that's right. Okay, so angle Y has to be 130 degrees. We can already tell that it has to be answer E because it's the only one that has Y equals 130. But let's just double check to make sure. So if Y is 130 plus angle C is 120, so 130 plus 20 means they total up to 150. So X has to be 180 minus 150, which will leave us a total of 30 degrees. So again, this is correct because it says that X is equal to 30. Number four requires us knowing something that is awfully hard to explain in the short amount of time that we have to do it. If you've had some AP math before, the word Pythagorean theorem might be familiar to you. So Pythagorean theorem. And that is what you could use to solve number four. It would take a little bit too long to actually try to explain how to work the whole thing. But if you have had Pythagorean theorem before, I'm just going to say that a squared plus b squared equals c squared might ring a bell to you, and that might help you figure out how to solve this problem the correct way. Right now, though, we're just going to have to go off of what 7th grade math we probably have background knowledge of, and because Pythagorean theorem is just too hard to explain without taking a really big lesson. So let's see if we can at least take a decent guess as to what the answer might be. So it says that a bird lands on the wire and gets stuck. Jessica, for fun, measures the height of the telephone pole and the ground, and the distance on the wire from the ground to the bird. Then, so apparently she wasn't being very nice to this bird, because she took the time to measure how high the pole is and how far away from the ground the pole was. Then she decided to set the bird free, so that's not very nice. Okay, what was the rest of the wire length from the bird to the top of the pole? So we're trying to figure out how long this side right here would have to be. Now, hopefully you might remember from 7th grade that the way that a triangle works, you have to be able to add two sides together, and when you add those two sides together, they have to be longer than the third side. So that can at least help us to narrow down a couple of these answers and have a good shot of at least guessing the right one. So 24 plus 10 are the two sides that are given to us. So 24 plus 10 adds up to 34. So that means that that has to be longer than the side of the distance of the third side. So let's see if there are any options that we can knock out here. And you can kind of tell by looking that this third side is longer than the other two sides. So let's see actually if that helps us knock out something first, because that might be a little bit easier than trying to add the sides together. So this side is what's called the hypotenuse of the triangle. It's definitely the longest side. So let's look at option A, for example. So if this distance from the bird to the top is 16, 16 plus 6 means that this whole side right here would only be 22, which wouldn't make it longer than this side right here. It has to be longer than the 24. So we know that at least option F is not the right answer. So that helps us a little bit. Let's see if this were 30. Well, and that is pretty much the only answer that we can eliminate just by using 7th grade background knowledge. But at least now you have a 1 out of 4 shot of getting it right instead of just a 1 out of 5 shot. For those of you that have had advanced algebra or advanced 7th grade before, you might have had Pythagorean theorem. So I am going to show you really quickly what you can do. And some of you guys that are really quick learners might even be able to catch on too, even though we're not going to do a whole lesson on it. But maybe there's enough here that you can at least take a good guess about what to do on the real thing. So the way a right triangle works is these two shorter sides are called A and B. So A is going to be 24, B is going to be 10, and then C is the length of this whole thing right here. And we don't know how long the whole thing is. So the way a right triangle works, if you square the first side, and then you square the second side, and then add them together, it gives you the square of the third side. So we don't have to remember how to square a number. Your calculator will do it for you. So if I type in 24 to the second power, that gives me 576. If I put in 10 to the second power, that gives me 100. So 576 plus 100 is 676. So because this is a right triangle, what that means is I took these two sides and I made them to the second power. I added them together. That'll give me the distance of the third side if I put it to the second power. So let's just take the answers that are given to us and square them and see which one gives us 676. Again, we've already ruled out option F, so I'm just going to start with G. If I do 30 squared, and actually I just noticed it does this weird A, B, C thing. That's kind of, I didn't even notice that misprint until just now. Sorry about that, guys. So 30 times 30, or 30 squared, gives us 900 for this one, okay, which is not the 676 we're looking for, so that's not going to be the right one. If I type into my calculator 20 squared, that's going to give me 400, which is not 676 like I'm looking for. So now if I do 26 times 26, there it goes. Now it gives me that 676 that I was looking for. And again, guys, this is really complicated stuff. If you're the type that picks things up really quickly, you might be able to use this brief lesson where you do the a squared plus b squared equals c squared. If what I did didn't just make sense to you, that's okay, because this is really hard content. But at least try to use the option that I gave you to have eliminated a few options, because A, for example, definitely couldn't have been the right one, because that would have meant that this side was shorter than the other two sides. If that's the best you can do, just knocking out one of the options is better than not knocking out any of them at all. So don't get frustrated if you don't understand the second way that I just solved that problem. Okay, looking at number 5, approximately what is the measure of the hypotenuse? And again, for those of you guys that understand a squared plus b squared equals c squared, what I just did is you take the two shorter sides and you square them, which means you make them to the second power. I could put in my calculator 8 squared and 6 squared and add them together. So 8 to the second power in my calculator would be 64. 6 to the second power in my calculator would be 36. If I add them together, that gives me 100. That means that the correct answer, the length of this hypotenuse, is going to be whichever one of these I get, that if I put it to the second power, it gives me 100. So if I put 48 to the second power in my calculator, that's option A. If I do that, that's going to give me 2,304, which is clearly way too big because I'm only looking for it to be 100. So I might actually try to skip down and do something smaller. Like our next option, 12, is a good example. So 12 to the second power, again, I know how to put that into my calculator, gives me 144, which is much closer to 100, but still too big. So that means the one that has to be right is E, 10, because it's the only one of our answer choices that is smaller than 12. Number 6, what is the measure of the missing length in the triangle? Again, you can tell, guys, that they really like Pythagorean theorem on the ACT Explorer. That's why I'm really trying to at least go over some options to help you try to figure out what to do. And unfortunately, there are no options that we can just knock out by looking at the answers, because none of these answers is bigger than 13. Because this is the hypotenuse of the triangle, the answer, which is this length right here, has to be smaller than 13, because this is the longest side. And it'd be great if one of these answers were bigger than 13 so we could knock it out, but unfortunately, it's not. So we're going to try to see if we can do a squared plus b squared equals c squared. Remember, that means the two longest sides. We don't know what this side is right now. So whatever this mystery number to the second power is, plus this number to the second power, if we add them together, it's going to give us this number to the second power. So I'm going to put 12 to the second power in my calculator. That's going to give me 144. I'm going to put 13 to the second power in my calculator. That gives me 169. So whatever this number squared is, plus 144, it's got to equal 169. So I'm going to take the answers that are given to me in the problem, answer choices, and see if any of these to the second power added to 144 is going to give me 169. So if I put 3 to the second power in my calculator, that gives me 9. 9 plus 144 is not 169. So F is not the correct answer. If I put 5 to the second power in my calculator, that gives me 25. And look, 25 plus 144 is 169. So we know for sure. So G is our correct answer. Number 7, what is the perimeter of triangle ABC? And it tells you that AB is 22 times the square root of 7. Oh, holy cow. What on earth does that mean? So this is one where, guys, this is some seriously advanced high school stuff. Right now, you're just going to have to take a good guess. But I can give you some strategies for how you could at least knock down a couple of options and at least have a decent chance of guessing the right answer. So you've got a button on your calculator that looks like this little, it looks kind of like a funny division symbol, and that is called a square root button. So you can actually hit that button on your calculator and then hit 7 and hit enter on your calculator. So everybody take a second, look at your calculator, see if you can find, and again, it looks kind of like a little squiggly division symbol. So if you hit that button and then put a 7 underneath it, you're going to see that you get a number that's like 2.6 with a big old long decimal. We're just going to round it to 2.6. So this little number right here means somewhere around 2.6 because the 22 is sitting next to this number. That means 22 times this number. So I'm going to put in my calculator 22 times 2.6. So that means the length of this side of the triangle is 22 times 2.6. So it's going to be somewhere around 57.2. So this side by itself is 57.2. The question is asking what is the perimeter of this triangle. So if just this one side alone is 52, or I'm sorry, is 57, and you can tell that these two sides are shorter. At the most, the perimeter of this triangle, like these two have to be less than 57. So the absolute most that this triangle could be, if you add all the sides together, because remember that's what perimeter means. If you add all these sides together, the most it could be is probably somewhere around like 150-ish. Because even if these two sides are pretty close to 57, they still have to be shorter. So your answer is going to be somewhere around 150 something. So I can knock out C because C is over 400. Okay, so that is going to be way too big. 72.4 is going to be way too small because remember the perimeter is the length of all of the sides around the triangle. So if this one side already takes up 57, I've still got two other sides to add to it. So 72 is going to be too big as well. So now I've got at least a 1 out of 3 shot of trying to guess it right. And you can use your calculator, again, to try to come up with at least a decent guess. So I'm going to go back to this for a second. So remember, this means because the 66 is sitting next to the square root of 7, I'm going to hit in my calculator the square root and then the 7 button. Let's see what that gets me. So again, that gives me about 2.6. So 66 times 2.6 is somewhere around 100 and is about 174. So this number is probably going to be too big because our actual perimeter is likely only going to be around somewhere about 150. So this one is likely too big. Now I'm going to try my second option. So I'm going to put in my calculator the square root of 14, which gives me 3.7-ish. So I'm going to do 3.7 times 33, because remember this 3.7 times 33 means that because it's sitting next to each other, that means you're going to multiply. So that gives me about 123. So I've got a pretty decent shot because this is probably pretty close. If I'm just taking a good guess, I'm probably going to guess that E is the correct answer because these two sides kind of look like they're not really a lot shorter than 57. So my perimeter is probably going to be closer to 150. So right now, I'm just taking a 50-50 guess between B and E, and I'm going to guess that E is probably the correct answer. And again, guys, I know that was some really complicated stuff. There's a reason that we don't do this until high school, but we're going over it anyway because some of you guys, especially that pick things up kind of quickly, might be able to pick up enough tips to at least be able to take a good guess. So again, use this little square, look at your calculator and just look for little symbols like this. the square root of 7 button, your calculator will actually do that for you. Then because you've got a number sitting next to the 7, that means multiply. So you can at least take a decent guess of what that number would be. So keep that in mind when you're doing the real thing. Number 8 is another one of those examples where it's using, you can tell they really like triangles on this test. So it's asking you how long AB is if this side is 16 times the square root of 3. So first of all, let's figure out what a decent estimate of 16 times the square root of 3 is. I'm going to use the little square root button on my calculator, and then I'm going to put a 3. So if I put that into my calculator, it's about 1.7-ish. So because the 16 is sitting next to the square root of 3, that means I'm going to do that 1.7 times 16. And it's going to be around 27. So it's about 27.7-ish. So this side of this triangle is about 27.7. Again, the way I figured that out, I found out with the square root of 3. I just typed it into my calculator, square root button, 3, hit enter. Then I multiplied that answer by 16. So I know this is about 27.7. So if we're trying to figure out how long AB is, we know that AB has to be longer than 27.7 because this side has to be longer than the two shorter sides. So actually, that really doesn't help us to knock out any possibilities. But we can at least take a decent guess that 256, because this side isn't a ton longer than 27.7, 256, that's going to probably be too long. So I'm going to take that one out of the running. Also, I'm looking at these two angles that are inside of the triangle. And I noticed that because this 30 is half the size of this 60. In other words, 60 is twice as big as 30. Something that you might remember from 7th grade last year is that if this angle is twice as big, this side has to be twice as big. It's because 30 is across from this side and 60 is across from that side. So because 60 is twice as big as 30, if this side is about 27, that means that this side needs to be about twice as big as 27. So 27 times 2 is 54. So even though we're estimating right now, this side is around 27, which means that this side has to be around 54. And again, that's because since 60, the angle inside, is twice as big as this angle, 30, the side across from it has to be about twice as long. So now we can knock out some options because this side AB, has to be longer than both of the shorter sides. So that means that F is out because 48 isn't longer than 54. And then J is also out because it's not longer than 54. So now we can at least have a pretty decent shot of guessing the right answer. So look at the square root of 3. Remember we did this a moment ago. I'm going to type into my calculator 3 square root, which means it's about 1.7. I'm going to take this 1.7 and multiply it by 16. 1.7 times 16 only gives me, well actually, I know that G can't be the right answer either. Just notice this, because 16 times the square root of 3 is exactly the same thing that it says that this side is. This side, AB, has to be longer than this side. So that means that G can't be the right answer either. So actually, that means that H has to be the correct answer. Now I'm going to do a little scrolling down here. To the last few, we're almost done. If these two lines are parallel, it's asking us to find the angle, the measure of angle 1. Another special thing about parallel lines, Remember earlier from our lesson we talked about how the angles on the inside are the same, and you can kind of tell by looking at them. This angle right here is the same as this angle right here. Well, also, and you can kind of tell by looking at it, this angle right here is the same measure as this angle right here. You can see they actually look exactly the same. So if this angle is 120, that means that this angle has to be 120. And it's important to know that this only works when you've got lines that are parallel to each other. But you can tell by looking at them, here this angle is 120, and so is that one. So your answer for number 9 should have been B. Number 10, angle A and B are complementary. Hopefully we remember from 7th grade that complementary means that if you add the two angles together, they equal 90. So it tells us that angle A is 6x plus 7, tells us angle B is 3x plus 2. So that means if we add these two angles together, they're going to be equal to 90. Think back to when you were in 7th grade and when you combined like terms. Remember that 6x plus 3x is 9x, and then 7 plus 2 is 9. So you've got 9x plus 9. If you add that together, that equals 90 degrees. Now I've just got a two-step equation that I need to solve for. So I'm going to get rid of this 9 by subtracting 9 from both sides. 9x is equal to 81. Then I'm going to get rid of this multiplication by dividing. X is equal to 9. So I know that my answer has to be K. Number 11. It says, suppose that A and B are both 180 degrees. What can be said about A and B? So let's just look at our answers. They are acute angles. Remember that acute means that they're below 90 degrees. So if they're both acute angles, that means the lowest that they could be, that means the highest they could be would have to be like 89 point something. So if you add an angle together that's 89 plus 89, that's not going to add up to 180 degrees. So they can't be acute angles. If they're both greater than 100 degrees, that means that they would both be over 100. Well, something over 100 plus something over 100 isn't going to give you 180 degrees. So that can't be right. They are both less than 90 degrees. Well, that actually means the same thing as acute. Remember that acute means less than 90. We've already ruled out that they can't be acute angles. So that can't be the right answer. So they're either complementary or supplementary. We just talked a moment ago that complementary angles are angles that add up to 90 degrees. These add up to 180. So that can't be it either. This is actually the textbook definition of what supplementary means. Supplementary angles add up to 180 degrees. So that means that your answer must be C. They're supplementary angles. Last one. These lines are parallel to one another again, and they're cut by a transversal. So it says how many congruent angles are shown. So this little box right here, you might recall, tells you that this angle is 90 degrees. And because these two angles together, this angle and this angle, form a straight line, they have to add up to 180 degrees. So if both angles have to add up to 180, that means that if this angle is 90, that angle has to be 90 as well. This angle and this angle form a straight line. So if this one is 90, then this one has to be 90 as well. If this one's 90, that means that this one has to be 90. And you can kind of tell just by looking at the picture, but then it tells you for sure right here, this is a 90-degree angle, which means that all of these other angles around it must also be 90 degrees. The same situation is going on down here. It tells you that this one is 90 degrees. That's what the box means, which means that this one, and this one must all three be 90 degrees as well. Congruent means that they're all the same measure. So as far as angles that are 90 degrees, you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8 angles that are 90 degrees. So your answer must be J. Now, guys, I know that was all a lot of difficult, high level, high school level material that you just learned. So I really appreciate your attention and that you were giving your best effort. And tomorrow you should be ready to take the practice version of all this review stuff that we've been doing.